This is a committee meeting for ReZone Syracuse. Here with me I have Councilor Carney, Councilor Lovejoy Grinnell, Councilor Green, Councilor Thompson, Councilor Bay, Councilor Rudd. If you guys want to introduce yourselves, and then we can just open up and get started.
Sure.
All right.
Owen Kearney with the City's Planning Division.
Dan Kozlowski with the Syracuse Onondaga County Planning Agency.
Heather Lamandola, Zoning Administrator.
Okay. Did you want to just kind of give us an overview of the topic of discussion, and then we can open up for questions if we have any.
Sure. Thanks, Councilor. So we're here today, obviously, for ReZone. We've done a lot of work over the summer, and a lot of that work meant meeting with a lot of you individually. And one of the things are going pretty well, but we still have, this is the last 1%. And the first 1% and the last 1% are usually the hardest. Just about anything you do that's worth doing. So one of the main question for you folks today is to discuss and try to receive definitive clarity on the question of site special permit authority in the new law, in the ReZone law. But let me just let you know where we're at right now. So the reason that we need that clarity is that we're trying to get as final a draft as we possibly can. Now, this doesn't mean that as we get into the final review, especially with Common Council considering a vote, that nothing can change, but we're going into the scoping process in the environmental review. So that means the scoping process is now a mandatory process. We're doing a generic environmental impact statement. And in that impact statement, there's a lot of typical issues that you can discuss in there, and they're not all mandatory. So what the scoping process does is we have written a scoping document that kind of just barely touches the surface of what those issues might be, and we've kind of made a declaration of whether or not we're going to go into depth as far as discuss. So like topography or steep slopes, we're probably not going to go into a lot of depth on that. We're going to recognize that as a potential environmental issue, but not necessarily related to adopting a zoning law. And then the public and agencies have the opportunity to comment on that, and they inform that environmental impact statement. So once we have that scoping done, then we'll go into the draft generic environmental impact statement where we will discuss some issues. And it's kind of an interesting document in that you can kind of discuss it to certain detail that you want, but you can clarify things and you can say, listen, zoning might not be dealing with this, but we have these other mitigating factors. So it's an important document, and it's an important process, especially for the public to understand not only what the rezone is, but why it is and why you're not doing certain things. So in order to get to that point, that we'd really like as clear a document, as final a document as we can possibly get to. And one of the last, really maybe even the last real policy item is this question of who will review special permit applications. So in May, that's the last draft that's on the website, and our directive from the mayor was to have one board review it. He has not indicated which board he prefers. We as planners and the planning team reviewed what other communities did, what the advantages and disadvantages were for a legislative body, and so that May draft actually has the Planning Commission as the sole board reviewing special permits. We had a committee meeting in May where we discussed this, and based on your feedback, we said, okay, let's meet with you guys individually. Let's have conversations about this. Let's go over the procedures. Let's see what's involved. Let's see how many permits are involved. We provided you a lot of that information, which is a lot of information to take in. And we have some strong opinions from a couple on either side, but there's several of you. So what we really would like today is, if we can get there, either a clear indication today or how we're going to get that indication from the Common Council on exactly how you want us to proceed so that we can have that final document, have the language right. Because I don't want to, we can't really move forward because it's you have to make a decision, the mayor has to make a decision. We're planners and we have, a lot of background in this type of thing, but it's your law and it's your city. So, you've got to make the decision of what, as a body, you want to do. So we're here today to answer any more questions that we can, kind of have a discussion about it. and try to get some clarity on how we should, what the language should really say in its final draft before we go into scoping.
Okay.
Because, and I'll just add that ideally we would have had a real clear consensus to this point, but just to be honest, we have a clear indication of how a few people feel, but we don't have there's no real clear consensus. And in the past, with other municipalities, and Joe can talk about this a little bit more, but they have gone to a vote where they just said, let's just pass a resolution so that the staff knows exactly what we want so we can move forward with this thing and get on to the other issues. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay. Well, I will be clear. As far as these special permits, I would like it to stay with the power of the Common Council. I wouldn't want to give that last bit of power to the Planning Commission. So if I can be as clear as possible, that's my statement.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I go back and forth with this. I think my biggest concern and issue with the process as it is now is I don't think the reach out is wide enough, because I don't know, as a district counselor, I get complaints all the time from folks that, because we have, what is it, a 500-foot radius? Is that?
400.
400, okay, 400-foot radius. And within that, you may not necessarily get people, you'll get people across the street, but it may not go directly to the person in the house. It may go to the landlord, depending on how the taxes or the bills are set up. And then there are folks that maybe live around the corner that are affected by the development that may necessarily not get an outreach. So that, I think, is paramount with it. I think once we get into the weeds of whether it falls directly on the council or not, I think if you're going to take it away from the council, my biggest concern and my biggest issue is we have no appointees on there. We have no real say in it. The best that we can do, and I know I've done it, I know other district councilors have gone to the meetings and spoke in favor one way or another, or and most recently had to go back and explain why we did what we did as a council. So I think that there needs to be some sort of, whether it does fall directly on us, I think, if that's what the council feels is best, I would say that I would be supportive of that as well. But I could also see allowing us to have appointees to the board as well. But I think the biggest issue is the outreach. I think we don't do an effective enough job of that. And that really sort of then falls back down on us as city councilors, whether it's a district or at large. Everybody gets calls, everybody gets emails and sort of scolded for things happening without everybody being in the loop. So.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah. My position has been clear on this since it was brought up with the minor administration, but I'll state it again for the record. I think, and I remember when Councilor Carney first suggested the idea of maybe appointments being a remedy of sorts. My concern there is simply this. The charter responsibility of the council is to be fiduciary agents. That is over money and assets, that we provide oversight. We're not elected to hand that off or to delegate it to somebody who's not elected. And the problem is most of the populace don't have planning commission people's phone numbers, they have ours. And if there's any concern for any issue that's ever happened, those issues come to us, and we oftentimes, unfortunately, don't have answers. One example is CIDA. CIDA hands out pilots now. We have no knowledge of it, and people ask us questions, and our answer is we don't know. And to continually allow ourselves to be put in that position, I think is a very bad mistake. In regards to what I understood from our last conversation was a point of confusion. Some of the councilors thought that we were taking up the work of the zoning office and all things related to permits, which we are not. Our responsibility would be no different than that of the Planning Commission, a body who sits here, listens, and make a determination, which is actually what we do every single day. And we do it with an agenda book that we get only a day before, not even a day, not even 24 hours before our study session. So to listen to people act as if this is going to be some crazy workload, you have all these months to study these plans, these ideas, hit all discussion, you have a number of public hearings about or meetings about special permits, which is associated with usually one item or multiple items. And to make the argument that that's tough when we do superhero work in less than 24 hours with an agenda book and make a decision by the following Monday, I think is misguided. I just want to implore my colleagues to give true consideration to the idea that, you know, at some point somebody will call you and say, I always use a very exaggerated example, how did that McDonald's get on the corner from my house, you know? And all I'm trying to give an example of is that you bring some property, some new thing to somebody's neighborhood that either increases their density, increases traffic, you know, especially if it's a residential one neighborhood, or and the people are unaware of it, you know, to the point of Councilor Carney's question about outreach. You know, we know there's a 400-foot square area. Sometimes, you know, and this in the defense of, you know, zoning and planning commission, sometimes there may be 2 houses in that 400-foot area. And so those are the only people who get the information. The point still, it's not adequate enough. But one way to assure that people are aware is if the people who they chose to be here and chose to watch over their assets are the ones helping them get the information. You tend to get a decent amount. At least people are aware of council sessions. Their choice to attend or not is theirs. But, you know, I would much rather be in a position in closing to respond intelligently about something that's going on if somebody asks me, instead of doing what I have to do with CIDA and similar organizations who have no fiduciary oversight from this body.
Can I just, following up on Councilor Bays, can you clarify a little bit about the workload of the hearings, how many hours, how often it would meet, just so we have a better understanding of what would be entailed with that?
So I took an average of the last 3 years of special permits alone, and there was about an average of 70 per year. The commission meets every 3 weeks. Sometimes there can be public hearings that range from about 5 to 15. We have had more in some instances. They do start at 6 o'clock at night, and they can go up until about 10 p.m. It depends on the issues. It depends on the public. It depends on the applicant. And it depends on who applied and when. So I don't know if that helps to answer your question, but the amount of work that goes into before it gets to the planning commission, it's pretty hefty research.
So that 3-week time wait, that period in between, is that essentially to make sure everything's prepped, ready to go, and get a slot of you know, a decent amount of people pleading their case in front of the commission?
Well, really, it's the referrals. So in order to conduct seeker, we have to refer it out to the bodies or agencies that are required. One is the county planning board. Sometimes it's the preservation board. There's DPW and engineering. We have to seek that technical advice so that the commission can make an informed decision and impose any conditions to mitigate any adverse effects that occur with respect to the proposal. So that time frame is for referrals and for information to come back from the applicant if an application has to be revised.
Okay.
I will say that the process under the rezone will be a little bit different, and this is in a good way. The more typical, right now, as Heather just pointed out, you have all of these agency and department reviews, and there's a lot of work that's done from building permits to sewer permits or whatever it is before it even gets to a public hearing. A more typical process that I'm familiar with in cities and villages and towns is the kind of the state mandated site plan review or special permit review process that involves a sketch plan first, okay? And then you review the sketch plan, kind of give an indication to the applicant what you're going to need to see, and then they kind of go out and fulfill a lot of that, but the detail might be a little less by the time you have a public hearing. What that allows you to do is condition the application on receiving those other permits instead of waiting for those other permits and all those details to come in. If there's a major change, it would still come back to you. But what that does is, number one, it gives you eyes on the application before they do a lot of work, which I think is kind of gets to your point about public notice and And in that sketch plan review, you might say, hey, this is kind of an important project. We know this is a sensitive issue in this neighborhood. You can ask them to hold a public meeting. That's been, in my experience, a very advantageous thing for a larger project or more significant project to do in a neighborhood. The point is, there actually might be a little bit more meeting time on your part, but hopefully there'll be a little less detail when you do make a decision, and then you'll condition that decision to go get those other permits and approvals, which will kind of get it out of the zoning's purview and into the permit office's purview. And if there is a major change, if there's a problem that comes up, if the fire department says you need to expand the alley by 30 feet or whatever it is, it may come back to you for a simple review to clarify that that's okay, with you guys. The other part that's new in the rezone is almost all the special permits require site plan review, and it would be a joint process. So you would not just be reviewing special permits, but you would be reviewing the site plan review. And the reason you do those jointly is because the site plan informs whether or not the special permit is going to be okay. A lot of those conditions on lighting or parking or landscaping or whatever it is are really show up in the site plan. So that's something else to keep in mind, is that it's going to be a little bit more information than kind of that 4-part test that's in state law for special permits that is compatibility with the neighborhood. It's actually going to be the site plan itself, which is a good thing. I mean, it'll give you more information, it'll give you more to work with to make it compatible with the neighborhood, for sure.
All right, I have 2 questions and I have a statement. Is there some kind of training workshop for new appointees to the Planning Commission?
Yes, there's the 3-hour requirement per year. And they do receive that training. Same with the Board of Zoning Appeals.
And
it's a requirement from New York State.
And we put on there's an Onondaga County Planning Federation, and we have the local conference every year, which is specifically a training conference for planning and legislative bodies that do special permit. Yep.
Second question. How much of what you described is commission responsibility?
I think the formulation of conditions, you can, over time, obviously the Planning Commission has developed typical conditions that they apply to special permits or site plan reviews, because they know, typical issues that they run into, and they have, language that they use over again, they apply it. Now you can codify that into a local law and have standard conditions of approval, so you don't have to think about it that much. But that formulation of the conditions is really, and working with the neighborhood to make sure, especially with a special use permit.
Yeah, nobody works with the neighborhoods from the Planning Commission. Let me get to my point. The question here is relative to the work the council would have to do in dealing with the special permits. Not what zoning does, not whatever conversations happen with the fire chief and the fire marshals, whoever else off on the side, right? Because the Planning Commission, I'm sure, don't travel around to the departments to get them to sign off. We don't need to hear that part of the discussion when the question is relative to responsibility that the council will have with hearing special permits. I made the statement before in the meeting, it almost sounds as if it's twofold. One, it often comes across condescending when you say to people, you're going to have a lot of work to do. You sure you want to do this work? That's the first thing. The second thing is to almost simultaneously imply by, I can't do anything except call it, when you take that idea like, this is a lot of work. If I'm saying that to you, Carney, my effort is to convince you not to do it. I'm not implying that this is anybody's intent, but context says as much to me, because this has been the common theme for the entire time these conversations have gone on. If I had to sum it up in a simple question, is do you really want this headache, right? And that's the wrong approach, So, I mean, my interest, I'm speaking for me, is only relative to what we're required to do. And I would prefer not to hear all of the argument or the case made about workload that other departments and zoning. We're not doing zoning's job. We're not taking away zoning's job. We discussed in the last time we met, everything stays the same except the body who's hearing it. That's it. That's it. And some of my colleagues, I don't know who, thought we were literally taking on all of that work. And so it needs to be clear. Instead of, with due respect, kind of putting up all this smoke, let's make it very clear about what the responsibility is here. At the crux of it all, I'll be as blunt as I was earlier, people chose the people in this room to watch their money, not everybody in the room to watch their money. And so we have that responsibility. We have to respond. This is about people first, everything else second. So I would appreciate it if we could be a little bit more transparent in terms of what we're talking about here.
Okay.
So I can speak to what is presented to the commission. Our staff does a lot of research. What is presented to the commission are the facts about the property, the past cases, the past resolutions, and also any issues that any of the other departments have. There is a deliberation because seeker is conducted, so you do have to take a hard look and look at all of the environmental impacts that may result and any mitigation that the applicant has provided to minimize those impacts. So in order to make an informed decision, there is a discussion with the applicant, and there are conditions that are most likely placed almost every time on a special permit. So there is a deliberation. I just want to make that clear, that it's not just you're presented something and
Well,
you say
everything in
yes.
here is a deliberation. This is a deliberation now. Yeah. But it still doesn't kind of get to the crux of the issue. I'm still kind of being told, this is a lot of work. I do a lot of work every day, and it doesn't just include what happens in this building. And I don't know about everybody else. I'm an avid reader. I read a lot. And I'm pretty sure, at least with my experience with these colleagues up here, they read a lot too. So I don't think that's an issue. I think it's just there is a feeling that I get from the discussion that nobody wants the council involved with what they're supposed to be involved in. Let me go on record to say that I've stated before that I think public authorities and commissions are killing legislatures and city government. That's my opinion. And I think the people get more and more further removed from their assets and their involvement with their assets because of commissions and public authorities. That being said, here you have the last say that this body will have on any land resources, period. Period. When this conversation first came up under the minor administration, the explosion on social media by constituents for the council not to do it was overwhelming. And so we're supposed to ignore that just because people don't want to face the council. You gotta be kidding me. I'm not saying it's you. But to me, that's not a valid enough argument. It's equally, with all due respect to my colleagues, not a valid enough argument to be like, oh man, we got to do more work. Yeah, do some work. Do some work. Some people are hardly here. Do some work. So, and especially when I consider how it used to be prior to many of the people that are here now. No disrespect to them, but some colleagues you only saw on Monday and Wednesday. We can probably use some more involvement and use some more work, but it's our responsibility. And nothing that I've heard in this entire, how long has this discussion been going on now? Years. I haven't heard anything yet to discredit my argument. Nothing has said, this will relieve you of this responsibility. Nobody's going to call you. The charter has somehow morphed and changed when you wasn't looking. Nothing has happened that's changed the concern or at least put that concern to rest.
Sorry, we have a forum to go to at 1, so I just wanted to say something real quick. So I totally agree with Councilor Bay. I like doing work. I think this stuff's interesting, and that's not something that concerns me at all. One thing I will say is that I think, having been to some of these hearings, the benefits of a special use permit tend to be diffuse, right? That, if someone's putting in a family daycare center or, a restaurant, and you're going to be a potential customer, that you're probably not going to take 2 hours of your time to go to a hearing to say, yeah, my life will be incrementally better if I do this, right? But if you live next door to it, you are absolutely going to go there and say, I don't want the traffic, I don't want this. So by nature, these hearings tend to be very biased against development. Right? And that's just the nature of how it works. And so one of the arguments I would say is that having some insulation from the voters might be beneficial. I've been in rooms where there's been interviews of candidates where specific special use permits were basically held hostage of, what's your position on this thing? And it's very clear that a neighborhood group will oppose you if you are not in favor of it. So I think that's one of the things that I'm concerned about is if we do have it, the short-term impact of not approving a special use permit might swing an election, and that might weigh over someone's head more so than the long-term benefit of having a development over the next, 30, 40 years.
So on that point from Councilor Green, my understanding is that there are two options with regard to the council maintaining or taking authority of special use permits. One is that the council itself holds the hearings, and similar to the Planning Commission, this becomes the deliberative body. But the second option, if I'm not misunderstanding, is that the council would appoint members to a commission similar, maybe it's not similar to what Councilor Green was saying, but creates a level of, the council has the authority over those appointees, but the council itself does not make the determination. Now, that may not meet everyone's needs here who's spoken today, but am I understanding that is another option with the council maintaining control over the appointees to a commission, so that the council would the authority still resides with the council and the council simply makes the appointees?
All the appointees.
Oh, yes, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. Well, that's the first time I heard that. But it has been discussed.
Always.
Well, if it's the council retaining authority, then the council would be making the appointees. So is that an option that the council could make all appointments to a planning commission, and that planning commission could then?
That be up to the mayor.
What?
But see, here's the
No,
problem.
no.
What I'm saying is,
It's not.
wait. When I say that, I mean we can't. It's not up to us.
I'm going to be honest.
Nobody
No.
but this
Let's
body.
go back because this has been bothering
That's
me
not up to
since you
anybody
first
but the
made the
people in this
statement
room.
about making some sort of resolution on the council floor about how we would like to see it. At the end of the day, if we as a council don't approve this, this does not happen.
That's it.
So no. And I understand. I apologize if I'm getting aggressive. Okay. However, at the end of the day, this decision falls at our feet, and we're elected by the people that are out there that put us into office, and they're the ones that are telling us what they would or would not like to see. Now, here's the thing. I don't care if it, and I truly mean this, if we go through and we decide that the buck stops with the council, great, because I get the phone calls, I can explain why what happened occurred. I can also live with appointees, that we get appointees. Because I know that that's someone that I can have a conversation with that can walk me through what's occurring, and they're a neighborhood person who has to deal with the same issues that I do. They're at a neighborhood watch meeting or a TNT, they're going to get the same complaints that I'm getting, so they're beholden to the people in their neighborhood because they still want to be able to have conversations with their neighbors. But to suggest that we were going to make some sort of resolution or that we don't have final say is absolutely incorrect. This rezone, we're approving or not approving it. I mean, it stops with us at the end of the day. So it's got to be something that's palatable to this legislative body.
Yep. Joe is going to clear up some of the legal issue. I just want to state for the record clearly, from the perspective of the administration, we requested this committee meeting to be held. We're grateful to the counselor for doing it because of your concerns. What was proposed in May, clearly there was issues with that proposal, and that's why we're here today, because we understand and absolutely heard you that there were concerns. Councilor Bay has been clear from before, during the minor administration, and so that is we absolutely heard from you, and that's why we're here today, because you ultimately approve or not the rezone that we have been going through for 3 years plus.
Joe Barry, First Assistant Corporation Counsel. I think now would be a good moment to give some legal parameters. there's several legal questions that have come up. First of all, to Councilor Carney's point on the resolution, that was my suggestion internally, that the administration is looking for guidance from the council as a whole, and if it was not clear through these informal meetings what that guidance would be, having a resolution basically saying to the administration, this is the consensus of the council, would be an appropriate mechanism to do that. So
And while I understand and respect that, my issue and my concern is this is an ongoing discussion. This is something that we should be having out here, and it should be made clear that the council's not going to support something where we're eliminated from the process completely. Because
I think that's the purpose of today's meeting, to get that feedback.
So, no, and I understand, but passing a resolution saying what we're in favor of, I don't really see a purpose in that. Let's get a good piece of, legislation or a good, new zoning ordinance in front of us, and have it be brought out in the public with public hearings and discussions, and let our constituency come and tear it apart. Let's put something forward that we can, as a council and an administration, that's palatable to all of us. To do a resolution is just, it doesn't make any sense to me. Let's put together a piece of an ordinance that we all agree on or can accept.
So just to lay some framework, because it's not my intent to interject in the policy argument, to go to Councilor Lovejoy Grinnell's question, the current Planning Commission under the 1960 City Charter is appointed by the mayor. There's 5 members.
Yep.
And to change that would require a mandatory public referendum under the municipal home rule, since we'd be reducing the power of the mayor. Now, that's not possible to do. The council is doing a referendum this November on changing your own redistricting power. So there's a process that can be carried out to that.
Yeah, I'm certainly aware of the process and how it works. I'm also aware of the fact that oftentimes, and people here are not to blame, at least not for the Planning Commission. Oftentimes, what happens with administrations is, in the name of improved efficiencies, they seek support from the state to inadvertently usurp power from the local legislature. That has been the nature of government these days, and that's why I made my statement about commissions and power authorities, because that's exactly what's happening. The state says, yes, that's great, and then they write a law and they just take it. And then if the legislature make a case about it and the people are absolutely unaware, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, as a taxpayer, I'm concerned. But if I was a voting and taxpaying citizen, especially a property owner, and I heard this discussion, and even more direct, if I noticed that people were not, at least it appeared, that people were not aware of the potential damages they were doing to me, I would be concerned. Because we should be aware.
Well, that's a big policy question that can be debated either way, authorities versus local legislative bodies. As you know, there's been a lot of that debate throughout New York State.
I've already started that with the state. So.
But just to finish my advice, going back to the special permit question, as you may recall, when a special permit's before you now and there's controversy, our office in the past has advised that a special permit, the courts have ruled, cannot be viewed as a purely legislative act, the approval or disapproval. That's why we recommend getting a steno and having a record if the council is interested in voting down a particular special permit. So that process would carry forward if the council were to take on the responsibility of managing and deciding the special permits versus what the Planning Commission does now. And so the reasons are twofold. The courts have ruled that the council's decision cannot be arbitrary and capricious, so a record has to be established, normally through public comment, public hearing, so that you can show that it's been evaluated and your decision is based on a factual basis. And then the second standard, as Heather alluded to, under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, the council needs to take a hard look at the environmental factors. And that's something the Planning Commission is doing now for you. So basically, you would have to change the council rules to create a process whereby the council was reviewing those factors in order to come up with a special permit decision.
I think Councilor Bay addressed that earlier. Like, we understand that we will then be taking on, like, if we were to do this. Again, I truly mean this. I could go either way, and I understand that there's a process to change these things, but my point is still the same. At the end of the day, this doesn't pass without it being palatable to this body because we're elected by the people. If it needs to go to a referendum, so be it. But you know, at the end of the day, I get that if we were to take it on, we would. I think most people here understand that we would have to take on an absolutely. It is a much larger task, and I don't want to discount that. I get that, but it's what we're here to do. I don't think anybody's in here for the paycheck. I think we're here because we wanted. Yeah, we were here to do right by the city that we want to be a part of and involved in. That's why we're all sitting at this table. That's why we ran and got involved, or at least I can speak for myself. That's why I did. I didn't like what was going on, and I wanted to say. And this is absolutely, if we get rid of this, where we have no say or don't even have any appointees to some sort of body, then we've completely eliminated ourselves out of doing what I think is one of the most paramount things as a counselor. Preserving neighborhoods. I mean, that's essentially what we're here. I mean, we're fiduciaries, and that's absolutely important. But as a district counselor, preserving neighborhoods is one of the most important and jobs that I take seriously. So getting rid of this and removing us from this process essentially, defeats almost most of the purpose of us being here. So.
Well, I think just to circle back to what the deputy mayor said, the purpose of today's meeting was for the administration to say to the council, you have option A and option B, and in order to put forward the final zoning ordinance, we'd like to hear what is the consensus of the council, what option should we put in that final ordinance for you to vote on?
So I think there's a little more information we need to understand about options A and B. So what you're saying is what I suggested is not contemplated under either option A or option B that the administration came to today.
The option of having council appointees to the planning commission would require a local law.
You don't have to call it a planning commission. You can call it the special permit use board. Could there be some body, I mean, this is a genuinely intellectually curious question. Can there be some, first of all, what would the planning commission still do if the council had the authority over special use permits? And two, yes, could there be some board, call it whatever you want, that the council had entirely council appointees to?
I'd have to research into that. I mean, we're really talking a change from the present system whereby a planning board, a board of zoning appeals, manages the whole zoning scheme.
Oh, I know.
Special permits is one part of that scheme.
Wait.
And the council can take the special permits under their wing, but going back to change the role of the planning commission is a larger question, I think.
Well,
We're adding a new commission.
Okay, hang on. I got to leave at 1:15 too, so I'm going to get mine in. Joe Barry, God bless you. You know why? Because you're a good man and you're a good public servant. But in these moments, I just think of how you're the mayor's lawyer and why the council doesn't have our own lawyer. But I still respect what you're sharing with us. That said, I give all my weight. If you're taking polls, where does the council sit? I give all my 245 pounds to everything Councilor Bay has said, and I am not going to undermine myself by saying something else like Councilor Green. What Councilor Green said about the NIMBY banana, whatever you want to call it, is ridiculous. Like, I ran for this position because I'm not afraid to disagree with someone in the neighborhood when I think we on this body are in the best position to weigh whether the harm locally is greater than the greater good for the city, right? That's what we're put here to do every day, to balance those concerns. I didn't tell anybody, vote for me, because I'll agree with you all the time. I didn't tell this guy that. I didn't tell them that. I didn't tell nobody over there that. I didn't tell anybody at a neighborhood meeting that. I said, I'm going to vote the way I think is best for this city and for the people who live in this city. So absolutely, you want to come and complain, that's what the process is for. We're going to get the complaints anyways. So all my weight right here, there's that option. That's the way it should go. If you want to count more, you should count with some more people. But I think it should be with the council. And it is an undermining of, it is sacrificing democracy in the name of efficiency, right? So it's like classic fairness versus efficiency. Democracy is the attempt at being fair. We're the people who are elected here. We're the people who stay connected because we want to get reelected at least 1 to 3, whatever, 4 times, depending on your seat. But like, that's what we're here for.
It was just a bad statement to say it may not be bad to create some distance between the people and the land decisions. That's what that statement was, and I was hoping he didn't leave before I got a chance to address it. That was a bad statement. You certainly won't say to me, well, it may be good to put some distance between you and what we do at your asset, because then I'm going to vote you out of office. Because that's not what I'm putting you there for. I'm putting you there to make sure that the investments that you make are to my and my neighbor's benefit. That the decisions you make keeps us in the loop, gives us access to information, so that we can ensure that you're making the best investments, you know, to the benefit of myself and my neighbors. You know, so I mean, I think, you know, but I've never made bones about the fact that I think, you know, we have questionable people involved in public service. I don't ever bite my tongue in that respect. I think some people probably should find something else to do if they don't really care about what people think about how their assets are managed. I think you're in the wrong business.
I just want to answer Councilor's question about what the Planning Commission would do, because I think that's actually important to consideration of special permit. They would still have a site plan review. So there are many uses, all the commercial uses require site plan review. So if it doesn't require a special permit, it would still go to the Planning Commission for site plan review. The other role that they would have, and you can do this now with anything as a common council, is you can refer things to them for their consideration. So it doesn't mean if you get a complicated special permit and you say, well, you know, the Planning Commission should really take a look at this. We would like to hear what they have to say about this. And you can still refer to them, and it would come back to you with a report from them, and you could take that into your consideration. And that's very commonly done. I mean, that's done all over the state by many municipalities, just to send it to the planning board and say, hey, you know, what do you guys think about this? Can you evaluate this, what you guys see every day? Just to have their input. And you can do that on any measure, really. So there's still a significant role for the Planning Commission if it does go to the Common Council. There's no doubt.
In addition, the Planning Commission currently approves all street abandonments. They have to approve the widening of streets, the official city map, and I believe the comprehensive plan when it's done. So they do have some variety of duties, not just relative to special permits.
No, and councilors, I don't know if you have any more questions. You're exactly right. Part of the reason we're here today is seeking guidance from you. Previous drafts, we have identified a certain procedure. That was something that there was a range of feedback on, even as recently as this summer. And I think as both the deputy mayor and Joe had mentioned, that part of what we're here today is not convincing you of a particular role, but to seek your input and answer questions about what your preference is. That we are, as Dan mentioned, we're close to the finish line. And this is arguably the largest remaining issue that we've got to document one way or another. And so part of our interest here today is, one, presenting those options to you. We've heard pretty clearly, at least from speakers so far, what the preference is. But to go back, take these considerations, make adjustment, and get a final draft forward. As Councilor Carney noted, having constituents involved, we've had close to 100 public meetings. We've had robust public input. We've made changes based on the 3 drafts that we made. And this is one where we've heard, you know, a range of opinions, quite candidly, and we're back before the body, as again Councilor Carney noted, the body that ultimately has to approve this. And so seeking your input, we want to bring forward a good piece of legislation, a good zoning ordinance, and one that you're supportive of. The last thing we want to do is run into something where all the work that's in this, which special permits, quite candidly, is less than 10% of. There's a lot to this ordinance. And there's a lot of good material in this ordinance, and that was something we heard from many of you, that there was support for many of the other things, and not lose sight of the work that we've done, not get tripped up on one issue, and a critical issue. I'm not dismissing that, but seeking your input and your counsel on how we make this final decision, knowing that we're going to be before you, frankly, in the coming weeks, with a piece of legislation to get this adopted. So it's, I don't want to characterize this as, obviously that's been very passionate. We're here to listen and get your input. We're not here necessarily to convince you one way or another, but to answer your questions as you provide us guidance.
And we're here, I mean, mostly because of the feedback that we did get, and to Councilor Bay's points that he's making, that, look, I told the team, I said, we got to bring this back. We can't just put this out there. I want to hear from them again, so we make sure we get it right.
Best end to all this. Well, Owen, I actually feel like you've done a decent job, like, listening and hearing. But would you have scheduled this meeting if we weren't the final sign-off? Would we be here right now getting informed on like if we weren't the final sign-off? Because in this, we're like related to the whole setup. Either we are the sign-off and you keep us in the loop, or we're not. And we're not in the loop.
I think
that's the way that's why you're here now, and like we're basically going to take ourselves out of this other area.
Well,
that's the way I see it. So like it is great that you're here, and that's why I would say we want it.
Sure.
I have to say, it's interesting to ask that question, because lately, I'm a community-based planner. So I take things to the public. I take the heat. I'm not afraid of a public meeting. I got a public meeting next week that I should be scared of, but I'm not. I've been through natural gas drilling. I've done rezones. I've done all kinds of stuff where I've taken a lot of heat for, including critical environmental areas, which I'll tell you about someday. I have, in my current position, I find I have to fight more and more and more. And this is actually the second thing that we wanted from you today, to get access, to have these conversations, to get the feedback. I want the feedback. I want it to be yours. I want you guys to have buy-in and ownership on this thing. I want the public to as well. I want the landowners that are going to be affected with this to have buy-in and ownership. This isn't just yours. It's not just the mayor's. It's certainly not mine. Okay. That's why we're here. And we would have a meeting. I have a meeting with the Planning Commission on Monday night. I'm going to go and kind of discuss what they asked us to change, what they asked us to look at and to adjust, and go over those that we could do and over those that we couldn't do. One of the things you have to keep in mind, one of the reasons why we really need clarity on this and we want this to be as final as possible is, to date, we've put out something on the web, which is great, that all these different versions are on the web. You can see the evolution of this policy. From here on out, all of those changes that we make have to be redlined. I mean, we have to account for every change we make, especially as soon as it comes before you as an official law that you're going to consider. Any policy consideration, any minor adjustments to the law has to be as transparent as possible. Okay? So we've had kind of the easy stage where we can sit and we can make adjustments. We can come to you, or we can go to the mayor with, how do you feel about this policy, right? Which direction should we go on it? And it hasn't been anything major, but it's just been little tweaks here and there to give the law direction and give it a sense. This is one of the last remaining things, and I know that it's near and dear to your heart, so that's why we're here. And that's why we want to get it right. But from here on forward, after we release this next version and we go through scoping, everything has to be very well documented. We're not going to have the latitude and the flexibility that we had. I mean, it's still there, but you're going to have to really account for it and why you're doing it. Right?
One of those,
which is good, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. No, it's a good thing. So I just wanted to be clear why this is so important to us.
Here's the thing. The last chair of the Planning Commission was a doctor. Had nothing to do with land use, had nothing to do with engineering, nothing. But somehow the communication is always as if there was some super expertise on this process there. That has to stop. That's why I asked the question about training. Is there a training? All right, because he can be trained just like the last person was trained. Right? But the bottom line is, even the conversation about referring, you can still refer it back to who? Somebody who sits there who's a citizen just like you? Just like you? Like that part, all we need to know is what the responsibility, that's it. then we make a decision. But the whole, you're going to have to do, hey, come on, we got to stop that, man. Like that certainly does nothing for me specifically, except put me further in the no zone. I mean, I don't know if I can be any further, but, I'm not saying that you mean it that way, but it's how it comes across. And I would assume that a lot of what you're saying, if, you said there's a training requirement, that we would hear that in the training. This is what you got to do, and we'll do it. Right? It's that simple. But to hear it over and over again seems like an attempt to convince. It's a campaign.
Or it almost feels as if you're saying or implying that we're not capable of doing
That's exactly what that's how it comes across.
That's the tone.
Well, I apologize.
The messenger is responsible for the message.
Neither is true. It is no, speaking on behalf of the administration and the mayor, it is not implying that you are not competent. You are voted to be in the seat you're in. And if you weren't competent, the citizens wouldn't have put you there. And we are not convincing. I understand your argument completely as to why you would want to have the power to do this, because you are the ones that have to answer the questions. We want to put out a final document so that we can go through the process that Dan just spoke of. So I want to say clearly to you, neither of those is the intention of this administration. You are absolutely qualified to do it, and it is absolutely, we're here so we can get to a final document, because I don't know about anybody else, but this process has been going on way too long. And it is a disservice on all of our parts to the people we're trying to help in this community. I just wanted to make sure that was.
Okay.
And I apologize if I made it any other way. I've worked for years and years with a town board that handles special permits, and it was fine. I mean, I've never had a bad experience with that. So I'm not trying to convince you either way. I'm just putting out what the process is and what your options are and what the responsibilities are going forward.
Okay, and I think we'll be fine. It's just work. It's what we're here to do anyway,
Absolutely.
so we'll be fine. Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.